The end of cavalry superiority in the late Middle Ages changed the face of European warfare strongly and lastingly. On the medieval battlefield, which might have looked like this, cavalry units, these heavily armored medieval tanks, were often able to breach infantry formations quickly and shatter the lines of enemy infantry with brute force. When the front lines fell, the cavalry were able to threaten the remaining infantry in the center as well as the enemy archers further back. There are only very rare cases in which an infantry-only force fought cavalry successfully. The Flemish at the Battle of Courtrai 1302, better known as the Battle of Golden Spurs, and the English at the Battle of Agincourt 1415 are but two examples. In both cases, the infantry armies relied heavily on the battlefield conditions. At Courtrai, the victorious infantry took up position behind 3 rivers and fortified their position with ditches to overcome the French knights' natural advantage on an open battlefield. Under these circumstances, the French knights stood no chance and they lost 500 pairs of spurs, which the Flemish footmen took from them, hence the Battle of Golden Spurs. A similar example would be the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, when outnumbered English longbowmen also dug in and shot the French cavalry to pieces. A paradigm shift in warfare, however, only took place in the late 14th century, but it was not the increasing use of the longbow or the crossbow, nor firearms that led to this. The medieval knight, who had reigned supreme on the battlefield for so long, was finally outclassed by a new infantry formation, which was widely adopted first by Swiss mercenaries and soon taken over by many infantry troops in Europe. This was sometimes even referred to as infantry revolution, for example by Ayton and Price. To this day, this phenomenon is debated and contested among many historians. What most can agree on is that a change in infantry tactics did in fact occur. Still subject to debate is to what degree this development changed the supremacy of cavalry. In addition, many scholars argue that infantry troops were just as important in early medieval warfare as in late medieval ages. Anyways, the new tactic that the Swiss mercenaries brought to the battle did not require any cavalry. They used a formation which was called Gewalthaufen, literally heap of violence. Instead of forming a stretched shield wall, the Swiss organized themselves into deeper formations. This deepened formation consisted of up to several thousand men who were armed with halberds, swords, axes and other similar short weaponry. This tactic not only worked well against heavy infantry but also against knights, at least as soon as they dismounted from their horses. For the 14th and much of the 15th century, the only way the heap of violence could overcome mounted knights was to choose the place of battle carefully. The Swiss thus lured their enemy cavalry into valleys, marshes or thick woods. They also used tactical tricks, such as taking long marches to outflank the enemy, throwing rocks and logs of wood down steep mountain sides onto baffled enemy horses, or placing obstacles on the battlefield to limit the freedom of movement of the horsemen. Well, it seems the Swiss used similar tactics as the Flemish at Courtrai or the English at Agincourt. Throughout the end of the late Middle Ages, however, the Swiss were notorious for their incredible success rate in open field battles. Despite their successes, they were also notorious for being homesick. This was called the Swiss sickness and found its expression in songs such as the Guckisberglied, for example. The Swiss were sometimes forbidden to sing it because many thought it furthered homesickness. Here's a snippet. However, rumor has it that some of the French kings of the House of Valois refused to go to war without Swiss mercenaries on their side of the battlefield. For this astonishing efficiency, there were 3 main factors: a change in tactics, low cost and mentality. Tactics are up first. Throughout the 15th century, the Swiss refined their tactics, knowing that they could not face knights in their chosen location every time. They equipped the men in the front lines with body armor and pikes, which could range up to a length of more than 6 meters. Those outer rows protected the core of the square, which still consisted of lightly armored melee warriors, carrying halberds, short swords or similar weapons. In addition, a small number of mobile skirmishers, archers and crossbowmen, later firearms were deployed too, operated around the formation. In case of a cavalry charge, they could quickly run back into the square to seek cover. The pikes kept the enemy at a distance and prevented attacking cavalry from riding into the square and from dispersing the formation. In infantry-on-infantry combat, the enemy line had to deal with a strong push of long pikes, which often breached their lines rather quickly. Once the enemy lines were breached, the Swiss front lines opened and the halberdiers and sword fighters ran forward to kill the enemies in single combat. The decisive problem of this phalanx-like square was that it was not flexible at all, as it is hard for several hundred men to keep the formation while running and changing directions. All in all though, the Swiss strategy was so successful that others quickly adopted it. Well known are the German Landsknechts. When the Swiss and the Landsknechts clashed, as happened for example in the Battle of Novara in 1513, they fought a horribly bloody and entangled battle, which contemporaries called Push of Pike. These battles were usually decided by sheer force and will, but also by the length of the pikes. Push of Pike battles were called Bad War by the Italians and the French, because of the high rate of casualties. The pike square had many advantages which were a perfect fit for the small and rural departments of the 14th and 15th century Switzerland. No expensive equipment was needed, and coordinating the fighters in battle was much more important than individual training. This was important since a large part of men fighting in Swiss armies were actually farmers who had to cultivate their fields for several months of the year. All this does not conclusively explain the Swiss' dominance on the battlefield. One point, which is outlined by historians, is the fact that they had an entirely different mentality, since they were often defending their homes and liberties. This, however, doesn't apply for their deployment as mercenaries in foreign countries. In the end, the historical evidence we have boils down to the sheer will to win, to a go big or go home mentality, and the willingness to give their lives in combat. A famous example for this is the Battle of Grandson in 1476. The Swiss fought the well-fully equipped Burgundians, who deployed masses of cavalry and artillery, but the Swiss vanguard endured the enemy artillery fire stoically until their main heap of violence arrived. Just as Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, was redeploying his troops, the third Swiss Gewalthaufen arrived. The Swiss struck the Burgundians quickly and decisively defeated them. Some historians sum up this menacing mentality of the Swiss in lovely, yet convoluted words. Have a taste. Quote, "This natural force of the wild farmers and herdsmen, based on elementary aggressiveness, bestowed a terror-spreading impetus on the Swiss pike square." End quote. Those properties of the Swiss people and Swiss mercenaries alike were mythologized in the retrospective, especially during the 19th and 20th century nationalism, which is best visualized when looking at Switzerland's national exhibition of 1939. The Swiss mercenaries were of course not invincible, as examples such as the loss at the Battle of Cerignola in 1503 show. 9,000 men, mainly French cavalry and Swiss infantrymen, were shot to pieces by only 1,000 Spanish arquebusiers. The end of the prevalence of the Swiss pike square came with the development of heavy artillery and firearms. Cerignola is considered the first battle in Europe won by gunpowder. The Swiss didn't adapt their strategy to those alterations and thus lost the upper hand. The Spanish tercios, for example, were quicker to do so and combined their formations with firearms and artillery in the 16th and 17th century, which heralded the start of pike and shot warfare. But this will be subject of a future video. For now, we will leave you with some Swiss music.